Okay, welcome back after 1 week of kind of a break, e- except for Evan. Evan's an overachiever, so all right. So I already gave you the minion welcome. All right. Okay, first thing we're going to do is review Module 7, see how much of this you've forgotten. So we had worked on group functions.
Mhm.
All right, so the first one was create a query that will show the average cost of the DJs on demand events, round to 2 decimals. Anyone want to take a, without looking at your homework, what type of query, what type of group function would you use here? Obviously average, right? And
Mhm.
you remember the round function? All right,
Mhm.
well, it's the easiest query, and I am adding aliases. It wasn't required, but um, select round average cost is the field. And then where the comma 2 is just rounding it to 2 decimals, following the instructions. So when you run that, oops, we get 9,000, right? All right, question number 2, find the sum of salaries from global fast foods. And remember, that's that F staffs table.
Mhm.
So it's select sum salary from F staffs. And we have particular IDs, and I just use the
Mhm.
in command. So it was 16.75. Oops, don't jump ahead. And then number 3, what was the hire date of the last Oracle employee? That one should have been easy. It's a max. Remember, the max is the latest, min is
Mhm.
the earliest. So that one was January 2000, 29th. And then we went into, oops, what's the next one? How many songs are listed in the DJ? So it's a count and handling nulls a little bit. Count,
Mhm.
select count from D songs. And how many songs were in there? 6, 9, 22, 6. And how
Mhm.
many different location types has DJs in demand, on demand have venues? This was the distinct. So you had to select count distinct location types because there's a few duplicates in there. So the correct answer was 4. And then the last question was interesting. In the D-track listing table in the DJ's on-demand database, now it's the same database, as a song ID column and a CD number column, how many song IDs are in the table? How many different? So it was a combination of two of the group functions, count song ID, pretty straightforward on that column, and then count distinct CD numbers. So you can run both of those in your little scenario, and it was 5 for total songs and 4 unique CDs. All right,
And I just want to ask, is this a distinct is when we don't want duplicates, right?
that is correct. So
Okay.
whenever you hear a term like unique, it's usually you use the distinct function.
All right.
All right. All right, the quiz. Let me bring that up. Where did I have it? Too many windows open. Quiz, where are you? There we go. All right. Oh, got a message. 1 second. Car trope. Uh-oh. Hope she makes it. All right. Question 1, average sum variance of standard deviation functions can be used with which of the following data types? And that should be only numeric, right? You can't use
Mhm.
those on date and text. the vendors table has these columns. Vendor's ID number, name, location, order date, and order amount. Which two clauses represent valid uses of the aggregate functions for this table? Select min, average, order count. That one looks right. Can we run that one? It's a number. Yep. Where max, no, automatically you should know that you can't use group functions as a condition in the where clause, so that number 2 is not right. From max order, remember you're gonna, well, max order date, that, how about 3? Is that, can you use that one? How many of you say yes? No. Maria says no. Nope. Some order amount, yes. And select some order date. Some order date. Well, can you use some with dates? No.
Nope.
So 1 and 5 were correct. All right. Let me make sure I have everyone's attendance. Okay, man, we'll see. All right. 1 second. Back to the attendance. All right. Question 3. Using your existing knowledge of the employees table, will these queries return the same, create the same result? So like count, this is the whole reference to nulls. So the top one will return 20, right? The bottom one will return how many? Remember? I happen to have them right here. So the bottom one returns 4. And the top one is going to return 20. So no, the answer is no. Not the same. So the correct answer was no. What would the following SQL query return? Select count distinct salary. Remember that's distinct and unique. So it's going to return the number of unique salaries in the employee table, and that's selection B, the letter B or number 2. Number 5, basically some commission percentage count. You basically had to run this. I added the data, but if you look at the table, the data is the same in that table, but there's null and there's the appropriate nulls. So you know that the commission percentage is going to be 4. So that eliminates the last 2. And we're looking for also the sum of the commission percentage. If you added that up in your head, you see that it's 0.85 and 4. So A is the correct answer. And then last but not least, select count amount from inventory. What will occur when this query runs? It will return the total number of rows in the amount that has data in the amount column. So that's number 2. All right. Oh, wait, we have more. Sorry. I thought we had only, it was only 6 on the assignment. All right, 7, please refer to the employees table. Which select query will return the number of employees whose salary is greater than 50,000? So automatically, you know that there's going to be a where clause. But we're just looking at the number of employees who has salary greater. So you can use the count. Select count from employees where salary is greater than 50,000. So the 4th selection is the correct one. And of course, if you ran all of these, and we're not into group by and anything like that yet, I think that 5th one was just to confuse you a little bit. All right, and then 8, the styles table contains this data or these data. Okay, and you run the select statement, select count category from styles. Which value is going to display? So how many rows have a category. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the correct answer is C, 7. All right, there you go. So that was the module 7 that hopefully you all have completely forgotten, but we will move on. On to module 8. This is the second half of our group functions. A little bit more about what we can do with group functions. A little, some things are useful, some things you just need to know. Our objectives, construct and execute a query using group by, and then group by and having, and then construct and execute a group by on more than one column, which is absolutely acceptable. All right. So the purpose, what if we wanted to know the average salary of all employees? We saw some of this before. You could write a query that looks like this. Pretty straightforward. But if you wanted to know the average salary of employees based on their department, you'd have to separate it with what you know. You probably would want to, or be pointed towards writing a bunch of queries, right? All of the departments, etc., and so on. But something you're going to learn now, group by and having, will simplify this whole scenario. Although I can remember writing several queries like this. All right, group by. So you use the group by clause to divide the rows in a table into smaller groups. The summary information about each group can be returned. So take a look at this query. Select department ID, round average salary 2. You've seen this before as average salary from employees, group by department ID, and then in order by is just we're putting them in numerical order. And just with that simple query, we have the department ID, and an average salary for that department. All right. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? All right. Moving right along. So in the select statement, basically we're putting the columns that were in a list, and then the average function, remember that's numerical. Piece of cake, right? So, challenge for you all, what is the query to find the maximum salary of employees for each department? How would who wants to tell me, or tell me what that query will look like? Maximum salary for each department. So who's making the most in each department? Very similar, right, than what you just seen, right? And yes, department ID, max salary from employees, group by, I don't know why I left out the order by, but so group by department ID, and it will separate all of your return values for each department. And yes, we have a null department because I think the big boss doesn't have a department, or someone is not assigned to a department. So these are all the average salaries for each of the departments. So which department is the executive department? Probably 90, right? Right, pretty useful, the group by. The group by function has some nuances associated with it. The group functions require that any column listed in the select clause, and this is a crazy rule with SQL that can drive you nuts. So any column listed in the select clause that is not a part of a group function must be listed in the group by clause. I can remember, running many queries where I'd include all the columns because they were part of the report. So with that, what's wrong with this query? Will this query actually run? Job ID, last name, average salary from employees, group by job ID. And why would it not run? Based on that sentence above. It'll give you an error. You're like, I don't know. Why is there an error? You'll get this error. So following that general rule, or that basically you need to have the last name, because basically there's a kind of a reason behind that. Every job ID is associated with a last name. So if you're going to group it by the job ID, you're grouping it by the last name as well. So you just need to include that. That's the logic behind it. So yes, you must include last name in the group by clause. All right. It is a odd requirement, but it is that. All right. So that's group by. Group by, and you'll run across several scenarios. And please run through the practice queries. It's a very useful clause. All right, here's a query. Select country name, region ID from WF countries, group by region ID, order by region ID. So basically, we're wanting to know the number of countries in each of the regions, right? So country name, and we can use alias there as well if we like. And so there's 15 countries in region 5, etc. Remember, group functions ignore nulls. So if any country does not have a country name, it will not be included in the count. And that's the one thing that you really need to be cognizant of nulls, and especially if you're doing things like group functions. Very important. So of course, this is unlikely, but when constructing, we need to think about all the possibilities. So that's what I'm referring to now. As a matter of fact, even as an analyst, you really need to know what data is in your tables. Because if you have one calculation that's off because you haven't accounted for a null, you get fired. Oh well, sorry. So in a case like this, it's probably better to use the wildcard count, because this will just count the number of rows. Now, you can't just wildly use that, because you need to understand if there's a country in this case that's not listed in a region, etc. So the whole idea of accounting for nulls is important when it comes to group functions. All right, another query. Select department ID, max salary from employees where last name is not equal to king. So basically, we're wanting everyone that's not the CEO. Group by department ID. Now, why am I doing this? So we can also use a where clause to exclude rows as normal, filtering. So remember, this is not, even though we can't use a group function in the where clause, we can still use the where clause to filtering. I'm pretty sure we arrived at that conclusion. And that does not impact your group by order by. So just to throw out some more examples for the group by, another one as far as this one is focusing on population. So we're looking at the average population for each region, and hence that's the query that would go with that, round average. And we're just using a round just so we have a nice whole number. All right. That would probably be the average of each country. Count the number of spoken languages for all countries. So here we go. So remember, we're grouping it by that country ID. And that's telling you all the many spoken languages in each of the regions, or each of the countries, excuse me. All right, there are some guidelines. I hit on the big one is that group by and the select columns that are included. So it is important to remember, if you include a group function in your select statement, average, count, max, all of those, along with any other individual columns, you have to include those columns in the group by clause. That's probably the number one kind of guideline that'll trip you up. You cannot use column aliases in the group by clause. So group by must be the actual columns. The where clause the where clause is just filtering. And you must use it before, basically, in the sequence of things, you're filtering and then you're grouping. You want to think of it that way. All right. Any questions about those guidelines? Nope, makes sense. All right, there's such a thing as groups within groups. Sometimes groups need to be divided into smaller groups. For example, you may want to group all employees by department, then within each department, group them by jobs. How do you do that? So this is how I would do that. Select department ID, job ID, count. That's that mile from employees where department ID is, well, less than 4 or greater than 40, group by department ID, job ID. So every department, and basically there's 2 sales reps and et cetera. So now you're grouping them by both department and their jobs in our nice little small employee database. Does that make sense to everyone? So you're not breaking any of the guidelines or rules for group by. Pretty relatively straightforward. The grouping functions can get a little confusing, but just kind of pay attention to the order, because that's basically how the query will produce the results. All right, nesting group functions. Yes, they can be nested. As you know, max average. Now, why would you do something like that? I don't know. That's probably more confusing than what it's worth, but just remember, nested means a function within a function. So another challenge question, how many values are going to be returned with this query? 1, 20, infinite? What do you think? How many values?
It would just be 1, wouldn't it? Because it's
I
asking
think
for
it
the
would
max.
just be 1. You're right, Daniel. The answer is 1. Why is it 1? Y'all remember the whole idea of group functions? It's creating, this is just a max average, the highest average of all the departments. Now you probably want to include the department ID to see which that department is, but once again, this is more focusing on nesting functions. So this is average salary of each department, and then from that list, the single largest value. So will you need that? Who knows? Maybe someone's asking for that information. All right, now we're going to move right to the having clause, which is pretty important with group functions. Suppose you want to find the maximum salary in each department, but only those departments in which have more than 1 employee. So what's wrong with this query? Can we just do this? Select department ID, max salary from employees where count is greater than 1. What's wrong with that? Anyone want to speak up? Speak up. Come on.
The count is in the where clause and the aggregate functions can't be in the where.
Exactly. So how do we write this query then? Well, we have a solution. Yes, you'll get that nice little error. So that's why I'm introducing you to the having clause. So in the same way the where clause is used, and this is pretty important, to restrict rows, the having clause is used to restrict groups. And you'll see that on the midterm. So, inject that into your memory. Where clause, restrict rows, having, restrict groups. In a query using a group by and a having clause, rows are first grouped, group functions are applied, and then only those groups match the having clause are displayed. Oh, what? All right, so we're going to write that same query, and it'll look like this. So instead of where count is greater than 1, we use the term having or the clause having, and this will run. So this is going to bring back the max salary of all the departments that have more than 1 employee. Hey, we did it. And you just have to substitute having with where. Okay. This is important because you're going to be speeding through a query and not wondering not figuring out why you keep getting this group by error, because you have an aggregate function in your where clause, or you're using a where clause. Remember having, filters groups, where filters rows, etc.
Mhm.
All right. Here's another example. Defines first it finds the average population of the countries in the region, and then only returns the region with the population of more than 300,000. So another filtering mechanism, filtering specifically for groups. Okay, very, very useful. I've used this quite a lot in my querying career. So although having clause can precede the group by clause in the select statement, it is recommended that you place each clause in the order shown. So this is the recommended order. Now, with Oracle, yeah, you could probably get away with swapping things, but I would suggest select from where group by having order by. Leave your order by essentially the last thing in your querying when you're using groups. Please remember that, because sometimes you may forget about it, you can get away with it. And well, when I check your queries, I'm going to comment on the fact that, we probably want to stick with consistency here. Yes, please keep the order by for the very last thing if you're going to create an order. All right, not too bad. So you just learned about group by, along with the group. Still, we've learned the group functions, but here's the extension group by and having. Pretty important. All right, so now I'm going to confuse you all even more. I'm going to introduce you to what's called roll-up and cube operations. Now, this particular section, it's a truly a need to know. You probably won't use a lot of cube and roll-up. It's kind of an organizational way to represent things, but it is part of our lesson. So we're going to use roll-up to produce subtotal values. It seems useful. It's just that there's so many different ways to do this as opposed to running queries, especially if you have large amounts of data. You probably would end up writing a program or something in Python or even scripting something. But anyway, so roll up cube and use grouping sets to produce a single result table. That's a lot of fun. Use the grouping function to identify extra rows values created by either a roll-up or cube. So try not to be bored to death by this section. It can be useful. Of course, we have to come up with a reason. So once we have selected our groups and computed aggregates, we also want subtotals per group and grand totals of all rows selected. Some crazy finance person may say, yes, we need this. So as opposed to using a spreadsheet application like Excel, we can actually use SQL to produce some of this simple math. Yes, believe it or not. So these are kind of an extension. They're listed as an extension of the group by clause. And that's where you would use them. And you'll see here in a minute. Roll up cube and then grouping sets. These extensions require less work while supposedly benefiting, being efficient from the point of the database. All right, roll up, and yes, these will be on the midterm, so which we're getting to. So in group by queries, you're often required to produce subtotals and totals. The roll up operation can be used for that. Without using roll up, you can write several queries, although and sometimes even using a spreadsheet is a little bit easier than writing some of these simple queries. But roll up creates subtotals that roll up, hence the name, from the most detailed level to the grand total. And accounting 101, I know you're all thrilled about that, but that's where this comes from. So it's straightforward. It creates a subtotal that rolls up to the grand total. It uses an ordered list of grouping columns in its argument list. First, it calculates a standard aggregate value specified in the group by clause. Then it creates a progressively higher level of subtotals, moving from right to left through the list of grouping columns. Finally, it creates a grand total. All right. So here's the query first. Select department ID, job ID, sum, salary. So salary is the big thing here. From employees where department ID is less than 50. So all the departments that are, well, 10 and 20 in this case. Well, null too. So, and then group by, it's an extension of the group by clause. So group by roll up, department ID, job ID. So we're grouping by departments and jobs. So you see here, and it is kind of confusing. I'll try and explain it. So the subtotal of department 10 is the second line. So maybe we should call it roll down instead of roll up. Anyway, stick with me. The subtotal for department 20 is on line 5. And then the grand total, that's both departments that are part of the where clause, are in this. And pay no attention to the nulls, it's just saying that that's a total line. And I think in our SQL developer, you'll see that you don't have the term null, you just have a little dash. All right, so basically the rows that are highlighted or outlined here are produced by the roll-up operation. So subtotal, grand total. Make sense?
Yeah, I see.
It can be useful. All right. Here's a roll-up result formula. It's very complex. The number of columns or expressions that appear in the roll-up argument determines the number of groupings. So the formula is normally number of columns plus 1, where the number of columns is the number of columns listed in the roll-up argument. Yeah. So we look back here, we have 2. How many columns do we have? 1, 2, actually 3. No, actually we only have 2. So that means that the rollup will generate 3 columns of its own. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So that formula kind of works. No, it works. All right. So to flush this out a little bit, 2 columns are listed in the rollup, department ID, job ID. Therefore, 3, as I said before, 3 columns are produced. And basically, common sense will tell you 2 columns, meaning 2 subtotals and 1 grand total, equals 3 rows created by the rollup. I know that's very complex math. So, what if you have 50 columns? Then that's a lot of additional columns. But you probably are not going to have 50 columns in a rollup. That makes no sense. All right. So without rollup, basically, we just have our regular 3 columns here because we just have our department and the employees in the department. So this is what the result would look like. All right. And you would need multiple queries to do the calculations. So we're able to not do that. Okay. And that's roll up. I'm going to go back and show you. This is the roll up result. Subtotal, grand total. Relatively easy. Now, cube, you thought you were confused. Wait till you hear about cube. What the heck is cube? All right. Cube like rollup is an extension of the group by. It produces, oh, here we go, cross tabulation reports. I know you're all thrilled about that, right? Oh, no. It can be applied to all aggregate functions that basically run on numbers, because usually that's what you're dealing with. Columns listed in a group by clause are cross-referenced to create a superset of groups. And I will tell you, in my many days from database work, I probably used the cube function maybe once, legitimately. So the aggregate functions specified in the select list are applied to the group to create summary values for the additional super aggregate rows. So now you got something to tell your friends, right? Yeah. All right. So every possible combination of rows is aggregated by a cube. You have n columns in the group by clause. There will be 2 n possible super aggregate combinations. And you're scratching your head like, what the heck? All right. Mathematically, these combinations form an n-dimensional cube, which is where the operator got its name. Not n-dimensional cube. Oh boy. Yes, companies like Amazon, well, I have to say not so much anymore. They use other type functions, but initially, when they're starting to build lots of data, they would use cubes. Basically for their sales tables, and so they commonly request some type of cross tabulation, which is what it's used for. So let's take a look at a very basic example in our employees. So if you look at this query, select department ID job, same query that we had before with the roll up, we're going to use a cube. We get the same thing, but even more useful. Okay, less useful, I'll admit. More confusing. So you get both a subtotal of the departments, a subtotal of each of the jobs, and then those are create a grand total. It's a truly what you call a cross tabulation. So this is accounting financial person's dream query if they can understand the results. But yeah, so if you look at total report, subtotal for that job, subtotal for this job, subtotal for that job, subtotal for the department, subtotal for department 1, department 2, and then this is more of a roll up. Should have been roll down and roll up. Anyway. All right. Cube. You'll see it somewhere in our little lessons and exercises. Will you see it in industry much? The answer is no. Most companies will not have their database administrators or analysts running cubes. They pass it on to the accountants and the finance guys. All right. Take a deep breath. You got through it. You'll never see the cube. Well, maybe on the midterm, maybe one question, but I guarantee you won't run into cube much anywhere. All right, grouping sets. Still another extension of the group by clause. And it's used to specify multiple groupings of data. These functions, these extensions are useful to a point. They're good to know, as I said before. So it gives you the functionality of having multiple group by clauses in the same select statement, which is not allowed in the normal syntax. And that can be useful. And yes, it can be confusing. So we'll take the good with the bad. So if you want to see data from or still employees table grouped by department ID, job ID, and manager ID, but also grouped by department ID and manager ID, basically, instead of writing a couple of group by or adding a couple of group by clause, you can use the grouping sets with the group by. Now for our database, it's pretty simple. But imagine if you have 3 million employees, it'll get 9 million rows instead of 3 million. Well, anyway, it can get pretty cumbersome and complicated. So here's our query here as far as grouping sets. Now remember the condition was we're gonna group by department ID, job ID, manager ID, and then group by what did I say? Well, I have 3 grouping sets here. Job ID, manager ID is 1, department ID, job ID is 2, department ID and manager ID is 3. So you're creating these grouping sets based on this condition. So this is all the departments, department 10 and 20, and then we're grouping in a certain way. Maybe you need a report, but it's not doing anything special. You're just grouping these particular selections based on what grouping set you're identifying. Does that make sense? I don't want to confuse myself. So the first one, or the one here at the bottom is job ID, manager ID. So basically, these are our job IDs and these are their managers, and that's their salary. Now we include salary in here because that's our aggregate function. And then department ID and job ID. Department ID, job ID, the manager ID, and then salary. And then finally, department ID and manager ID. Department ID, manager. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Will you use that? Yeah, I don't know, maybe. It may help you. So when you use rollup and cube to create reports with subtotals, you quite often need to determine which rows in the output are actually rows returned. So basically, you may be asked, highly unlikely, to try and differentiate or even clarify your report that you're running based on these grouping functions. All right, so using a single column from the query as its argument, the grouping function will return a one for an aggregate computed or zero. So basically, you're maybe even for your own good, you're identifying which column is actually used in the grouping scenario. I'm not going to show you a query like that because I've never used this, to be honest. And it's useful to know, but you just get a return. It's almost like a mod. You get a return. Yes, this is used in the grouping function, and this is not. So, just something simple to remember. I think I do have a few examples in the practice queries. All right, this is your blow your mind section. More than anything, as far as usefulness, you learn about cube, grouping functions, grouping sets, and rollup. So just get past the midterm, and then you can toss them out of your head. All right, set operators are interesting. Yeah, I've used them before in merging data, et cetera, et cetera. So they are useful. So define and explain the purpose of set operators. Use a set operator to combine multiple queries into a single query. Control order of rows return using set operators. All right, so I'm not going to read all this. Set operators are basically used to combine. Usually, the perfect example that I use in a set operator is to basically when there's a company merge or something like that, we have to figure out how to merge data. This is the general use, one of the most general uses of a set operator. I think I say all that in this. All right, so let's set the stage. So we're going to look at two basically sample tables. And yes, we're table A, a list of integers 1 through 5, table B, another list of integers 4 through 8. So just think of them as tables, table A and table B. All right, the union set operator returns all rows from both tables after eliminating duplicates. Remember that. So the query, you see there, select A ID. This is our ID from those very complicated tables. Union, select B, and that is the syntax. And so the pictorial there is basically, it's going to eliminate, well, someone typed, that should be a 3 there. That's a typo. Whoops, I have to fix that. Who typed this anyway? Probably have this in all of these. Hold on. Quality assurance. Whoops, all right. Okay, let's try this again. Union. Select from, union, select from. And so the return from a union in this scenario will be 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, right? Or actually, result listing all tables, eliminating duplicates. Duh, I did say that right. So it's actually going to return, wait, where do we start? Oh, I forgot myself. So it's going to return 1 through 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's your union. It will eliminate duplicates. So, and basically, if you join A and B, you would get only the 4, 5, and that's a different type of scenario. But in a union, all the data is returned, no duplicates. That's the key here. Now, union all will return all of the data from both tables. So you see here, you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. It returns all the data, including duplicates. Okay. The intersect is like a join. It only returns the common values in both tables, or the intersect, hence the little intersecting circles here. So this in our little query would only return 4 and 5. Okay. Would you use this instead of a join? It's a little bit different scenario, and you probably want to do more with the join. And then a minus, yes, that's a set operator, basically returns all the rows from one table, but not the other. Basically, if you ran this query, select AID from A minus select B, so it's going to return only the information in the one table that's not common to the second table. And if you ran the select, you do the reverse, it'll, and I forgot to change that too, so yeah. Have to be completely transparent. Oops. All right. So if you did it the other way, it would return 4 or 6, 7, 8. So if you do B minus A, 6, 7, 8. And those are set operators. I've only used the union all for the most part, because I had to combine data from both tables that were similar. So there are a few rules with set operators. And this is important, kind of a SQL, dynamic, or if you don't follow the rules, you just get a lot of errors. So the number of columns in the tables have to match. That includes data types. So the names don't have to be identical, but the data, obviously the data in the table has to, if you're looking for an ID or a phone number or whatever, yes, you don't want to just merge it, because the SQL command will merge whatever as long as the data type matches. So, but the key here is that the number of columns have to match. So you may have to create columns, and I think there's an exercise in that. So any column A-listed should be returned. So the key here is that the number of columns and the data type has to match. So sometimes if you're selecting rows from a table that do not have columns in column, you may have to create one and just fill it with nulls. And that's usually what you would do in a scenario. Just create an additional column or add an additional column before you use a set operator. I've done that a lot. As long as it is the correct data type. So for example, the employees table contains hire date, employee ID, and job ID. The job history table contains employee ID, job ID, but does not have a hire date. So you would have to create a date column. The two tables have the column ID and job ID in common, but so if you're tasked to union or do some type of set operator with those, you would have to create a. So you can use the toChar null function to create matching columns, as I show you here. So if we're going to run a union of the employees and the job history, you would have to do that. So select hire date, employee ID, job ID from employees, union, select toDate null. And all it's going to do is just create this column with all nulls that's of the date type, so that you're not, and as you see at the bottom here, we just have a bunch of information that has nulls. We just unioned all of the, the information from the two tables. If you did not use that to date null, you would get an error. Oops, excuse me. Okay, does that make sense? That is important to note because if we run a set operator and things don't match, you get frustrated. Generally, if you're running in union, adding nulls is not going to be a big deal. You just have to remember the data type, so to date. Remember, those are different types of, it's not a value, it's just different types or associations with null. Because the system will recognize that particular type of data, even though it doesn't really have a type. All right. So if you want to control the order, yes, order of your return rows and your little set operator, you can combine that with the order by statement, but it can only be used once and it can only be used in the second table. So you see this query here, select hire date, employee ID, job ID, and then we added the same union operator, union, and we're going to order it by the employee ID. So that kind of makes sense. So that result looks okay, I suppose. So now we don't have those dates all over at the end. If we're using that for some reason for a report, yes, you can use order by with your set operators. Order by can basically be used most any time as long as you're ordering it by a column that can be ordered. All right. So we can improve the readability of the output by including the start date and end date columns. This is just kind of a way to clean up the data so that it's easier to read. So we're including additional columns. So we got hire date, employee ID. We're going to add another date to match the end date, start date, to date null, end date. These are just matching those columns in the job history. These are magic columns. Job ID, department ID from employees. Those columns are not in the employees table. We're going to union it with the job history table. Employee ID, start date, end date, job ID, department ID. And so now we have more confusion than ever, but at least everything is matching. Department ID, job ID, end date, start date. And you notice that you have a lot of nulls here, but that if you wanted to complete the information on this table for some reason in a report, then it's probably easy to do that, recognizing where all the nulls are. Just a scenario and in usage of that set operator. All right. So set operators, useful, intersect minus the term set operators, basically the matching column to char null, and then you can provide an alias, and then union all, union all, intersected minus are the set operators that you will be exposed to. Phew. All right. Yes, that's it for the group functions. Not too bad. All right, so I'm going to, well, this is our midterm preview, but I'm not going to go in a lot of depth because next week is the midterm lecture. What I will do is point out the module. Well, I'll walk through what's required for module 8, and then point out basically what will happen next week when we get into the midterm. So let me bring over Canvas here. Where are we? There's Canvas. Oh. All right. So before I go into the preview, let me just go through module 8 right quick. Hey, spring break's over. All right. So our lecture's here. Open. All right, then our requisite or videos for resources, please review those. Even more videos, some on set operators, some on group by grouping sets. You don't have to review all those. Some of them are pretty boring. All right, then a bunch of practice queries as usual. I think I built this one myself. There's a lot in there. Very useful. Helps you to get into practice. And then the practice and solution exercises. Always helpful. Please go through these. Especially now, it's probably to revisit what information you need for the midterm. So there were 3 sections, and you have 3 sections of the topics in module 8, including set operators. So please don't just skip over those. And then our assignment for the week. You've all been doing pretty good with these for the most part. All 3 sections are represented here: grouping, group by and having, roll-up cube and grouping sets, and your set operators, the union, all, etc. And then, yes, we do have a quiz in this section, as usual. That is module 8. So just to forewarn you, or things get a little bit more, I don't know, accelerated. We do a little bit more after the midterm. The course is kind of backloaded, so I just want to prep you for that. All right, midterm module. I will have a midterm lecture. I already included the one from last term. I will recreate it, but if you're curious, I just threw that in there to give you some entertainment, or maybe not. But I may have both of them last term. Actually, everyone did pretty good. And we went through some things. I gave them some heads up. There's a midterm review in here. I would recommend printing this out if you have access to a printer, or take it down to your local library, or go on campus. Print it out. This has everything you need. And if you fill it out, add your own notes, you should be okay. The midterm, and we're going to go over it in more details next week, but the midterm, the biggest thing about it, I'll warn you right away, you think 50 questions is no big deal. It becomes long. Most of the students said, I got to 25 and 30, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not going to make it. But that's usually the biggest challenge. So print out and what I would suggest is go through the questions and answer the ones that you can answer quickly, and then go back and can complete the ones that you're confused on. All right. Requirement. Before you can take the midterm, you must complete this Respondus Lockdown Browser practice testing. Basically, in the module, and if you haven't by next week, we're all going to go through this next week. So I would recommend getting module 8 out of the way, and then just go ahead and go through this for testing the browser, because you cannot take the midterm until you test the Respondus Lockdown Browser. And I'm going to talk about this next week too. And as I said, we're going to take time if you haven't yet completed testing it. And there's 3 test questions, and don't worry about, you should be able to answer them, but if you miss one, I give everyone credit. You just have to make sure you've downloaded the Respondus Lockdown Browser. Okay, makes sense? And I will remind you and reconfirm. And then we have the actual midterm. And the midterm can only be taken with the Respondus Lockdown Browser. And you're probably asking, what is the Respondus Lockdown Browser? Well, basically, once you start the Respondus Lockdown Browser, you can't access anything else on that system. If you try to access anything else, the quiz will actually close, and you receive a 0. So just to let you know, that's the penalty. We're trying to access anything. And I know with this, just like the assignments, you want to use a SQL developer. A lot of it is just, if you've gone through the exercises, I mean, we're trying to, well, there's many reasons we're trying to get you to not memorize everything, but SQL is almost pretty pragmatic. I mean, if you know it, if you know some of the general rules like select from, then basically you won't have any problems. So, what else? And as I said, we'll have lots and lots of details on the midterm next week. We do actually have a midterm lecture next week. So, and once we have the lecture, once I'm certain that you've all downloaded the response lockdown browser successfully, then we'll talk about the actual, I'll open it up for questions. If you go through that lecture, there are some pretty good questions in there, and some, I think I actually went through 3 or 4 of the questions. I usually do that to give you a head start. Maybe the first, I think I always go through the last one, because by the time you get to question 50, you don't even want to answer it. You're like, I'm done. And maybe I'll get to the point where I'll streamline the midterm a little, so it's just too many questions, I think, but that's our requirement, and we have to stick with it. All right, so before we think about the midterm, don't worry about it. Just focus on finishing module 8, getting through the second half of the group functions, and we'll get into the midterm. We'll spend as much time as needed getting through any of your concerns next week. And the midterm basically opens, I think I open it up. Well, let me check. Before I tell you something wrong, I try not to do that. Of course, it's in Canvas very clearly, but the midterm itself will open up on Wednesday, April 1st, of course, April Fool's Day on purpose, and it'll close Sunday, April 5th. And I know that's Easter, and it's really a bad weekend because Good Friday and all that. Sorry about that. It's panned out that way. So I'd recommend getting it out of the way so you can celebrate your Easter. And basically, once you open the midterm, you have to complete all 50 questions in 90 minutes. That's plenty of time. And don't overthink. Please do not overthink any of the questions. I think I took out all the tricky ones. Well, at least most of them. Maybe there's 2 or 3 of them, but I have to leave a few of those in. But don't overthink and just grind your way through them. It's really not as bad as you may think already, but let's see. Yes, and module 8, if I remember correctly, module 8 is included in the term. I'll just double check that before I let you go. Yes, module 8 is included in the midterm, so 1 through 8. It's the last thing I'll say before you prepare yourself for next week. But as you know, wow, is this the last week of March, right? March 30th is Monday.
Yeah.
And then 31st is Tuesday. So yeah. So don't sweat it too much. I know we make this exam. Don't get test anxiety or anything like that. That is usually the biggest block in taking an exam, which is why we do it still. Assess your knowledge, but we're trying strengthening your ability to, utilize what you've learned. Okay, there. I've given you my psychology of learning in 2 seconds. Testing is, and especially now, testing is important because there's too many easier ways to get through, to accomplish particular things. All right, so I rambled on enough. Any questions or concerns about module 8? All right.
No.
So get through module 8. Don't sweat it. You've had your break. We're going to work hard until the end, right? Only a few more weeks left and you'll be done. On to the next learning adventure. And then we'll talk at length about the midterm next week, enough so that you'll be ready. I have confidence in you. You'll all be ready to go. There won't be anyone sweating any of it. All right? Right?
Perfect.
All right. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I will see you all next week at 6.
See you next week.
Good night.
All right, take
Later,
care.
guys.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.